Welcome and thanks so much for joining us here on the Owatonna Today Show. I'm Deb Gillard, your host for today, and today is Monday, May 18th, and a chilly one it is. I guess when I look at my weather forecast and try to find a wind chill because it's cool out there, and I was determined not to put my seat heater back on this year, but darn it, it went on this morning anyway. So hope you had a great weekend, and we're going to hope for a little nicer weather as the week progresses. I think we're on the move that way, but it is a chilly Monday. We are very glad you're with us. You, of course, can find us on Charter, Channel 181, and we are all over the place, too, on the internet. A lot of people are getting our Owatonna Today Show information by logging on when they're able to and when they can, and whether they're out of the Charter Channel viewing area. And so, of course, you can find us on Facebook, where if you like us, you'll get a notification of programs that are recently recorded and uploaded. You can find us on Twitter. That is Twitter at Owatonna Today. You can find us on the thirdhandvideo.com, and once you're there, look for the Owatonna Today Show program, so lots of opportunities to see us. We always welcome your comments and suggestions regarding guests and show topics, so please pass those along to owatonnatoday@charter.net or give Leanne a call at 390-5751. We have a very good show for you today. In fact, we're taking the opportunity to devote the whole entire program, because there's so much information, to the Owatonna Public School District's look at our facilities and recommendations going forward. And to that end, we have Pete Grant and Mark Sebring with us. So after we take a break for our first show supporters, we're going to dig right in and find out some great information for you today. So let's take that break. We'll be right back.
I'm Dan Branstead of Carlson Branstead and Company, Certified Public Accountants. We support the Owatonna Today Show.
Owatonna Public Utilities, real people, real reliable, real progress. Making life a little easier day after day, taking pride in our community, listening to what you say, a voice you can talk to. We're growing with you. Owatonna Public Utilities.
Greetings from the Steele County Historical Society. We invite you to visit us and enjoy your county's history at the History Center and Village of Yesteryear. For current exhibits and events, check our website, www.steelehistorymuseum.org.
Welcome back. It is Monday, May 18th, and we are here to talk about all things facilities in regards to the Owatonna Public School District. We have Pete Grant, Superintendent, here. Hello, Pete. How are you?
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And Mark Sebring of the school board for our district. And so they're going to kind of provide a lot of information and great perspectives kind of coming from each of their angles in regards to what's been going on. And we, of course, I know a lot of our viewers and a lot of the public has been hearing and seeing a lot of different things as it comes in pieces. We're hoping to kind of give a real comprehensive look at this today. And if we can, kind of start off with the whole history of how this started. And it really goes back to about a year ago, you were saying, Mark, correct?
The process itself started about a year ago. The school board, along with the administration, identified an architectural firm. We interviewed 4. We came up with 1 to take us through this process of looking more closely and carefully at our facilities. They did a very good job. They started a year ago. They looked not only at every building and the capacity of every building, but how do the student flows work? Where are we populated too heavily? Where do we have too many kids? Where are we okay? And they took that whole process from probably the summertime up to the beginning of the year.
Okay. And then the beginning of this year, it was time to put a task force in order. So how did that whole process take place?
Well, Deb, we look for how do we get a comprehensive group of members from the community to serve on this committee, knowing that it was going to be very time detailed and committed for 8 meetings. And we ended up soliciting some people who were recommended to us to say, would you consider?
Okay.
And then we just opened it up, and there was an application process. We had over 50 people apply.
Oh, wow.
And the only really main criteria was you had to be a voting member of the district.
Okay.
And then from there, we looked at trying to balance a cross-section of parents and former parents and grandparents and business people and rural people. And we came up with about 36 people, 37 I think it was, who said that they would give us commitment of time.
Okay.
And it was a really great selection of people. They represented the community very well. They gave a tremendous amount of time to us, all volunteer.
Wow.
And they waded through stacks and stacks of information to have a good picture and evaluation of what was going on in the facilities.
Okay, so to get us to today, you said there were 8 meetings
Yep,
that
correct.
they actually spent. And that, I mean, 36 or 38, how many people did you say?
It was about
ended up on it?
36, and
It's got to represent a great cross
Yeah,
section.
and and we thought if we could get 30, 28 to 30 to show up on a regular basis, because it's really time committed, and we were well at that mark all along.
Yep.
Most of the meetings were 2 hours.
Okay.
The last couple were 3 because we felt we just had a lot of things to complete, and people had lots of questions. So when we'd get to the end of the second hour, there was kind of like, well, people are still hanging around.
Okay.
So then we thought, well, let's give them 3 hours in the last couple meetings just so we can finalize the things we need to do. And they did, again, they did a tremendous job of asking questions, doing tours of the buildings we have, taking notes, doing some homework,
Okay.
and then always coming back prepared for the next meeting with questions and responses, and really probing what's going on with our facilities, and from their perspective, what they were beginning to identify as what they thought were problems.
Okay, so really, I mean, sounds like very, very engaged group, and we have to give them a big thank you. I know you probably have many times over for the time and commitment that they spent. So when the task force was finally formed to April 30th, which is kind of when their job was done, what was that time frame like? When was the task force? When did you choose the complete task force, and then they had until April 30th? About how long was that?
Well, we started at the end of January,
Okay.
and about every 2 weeks.
All right.
We didn't want to make it too difficult for them to be in attendance, but we also knew that it would take that week off in between so that the board and the committee and Wold Architects could have time to gather more information.
Okay.
We wanted to make sure we did it in a fashion that had some common sense to it and some appropriate timing. And so about every 2 weeks we would get together, and they always knew what the agenda was going to be. We wanted to make sure that there was, following each meeting, everything was put on the district's website.
Okay.
Whether it be documents, we had a videotape, everybody could hear the conversations. I thought that part was really well done. And so every 2 weeks.
It was every 2 weeks.
Okay.
And what's interesting is
That
that
is a time commitment.
there were no really school officials on it except for 3 people. Well, there were 2 principals, 3 teachers, that'd be 5. But the board intentionally was not on it. District administrators were intentionally not on it because we wanted this to be a community resource for the school district, and we didn't want to have our influence, so to speak, be part of that, because otherwise then people might say, well, yeah, you had people kind of twisting it. And so we just said, no, we're going to be on the sidelines watching.
Okay, kind of took that step back and just let it happen on its own. Were there any surprising things that really came up from, and again, this was data that was collected by the architectural firm, and then they had to go through that, and did they really reach out and say, okay, this wasn't covered, we need to do this, or were there any big things that really bubbled to the surface?
I would say no. When they started and began the fact-finding and gathering of information, the obvious things bubbled up to the top.
Okay.
And the obvious things were, first, at our elementary level, we're full. There was a change that happened this year, and that's that we have all-day, everyday kindergarten now. So suddenly, every single elementary school had to find at least 2 more classrooms. And we have a couple of elementary schools. We didn't have room for extra kids like that. So McKinley and Lincoln both ended up with portable classrooms that needed to be brought in, installed, and ready to go by the beginning of the school year. And at every school board meeting, we approve, or we at least observe, the fact that about a fourth of all of our elementary schools have too many kids in the classroom.
Okay.
We're overpopulated at the elementary level. So that was the first thing that really bubbled up to the surface.
Okay.
The second was, and it's a pretty big deal, we have not been spending a lot of money on maintaining and keeping up the maintenance of our buildings. And the reality is that we could spend a pretty big number just on what is called deferred maintenance. Roofs, heating systems, cooling systems, updating some plumbing and electrical systems within each of them. A lot of buildings are brick. There's tuck pointing that needs to be taken care of. Parking lots. Now, these aren't the things that necessarily translate real well into a student's education, but they are our buildings and we've spent money on them. It makes sense that we would need to take care of them.
You know, and relating it, and I'm sure people are, you know, it makes sense. It's not unlike your home. You can't defer, and then not have a huge chunk of money to then spend on it. You know, it's the same with all of these buildings. You can't leave the heating and cooling and all those things that you were talking about. And while we may not have brick that needs to be tuck pointed, you can't do it. So, you know, a little bit needs to be done along the way. And if you don't, then you're kind of faced with a little more emergent situation, I think.
Right.
So.
You know, and the frustrating part is that people always ask, well, why weren't you doing this all along? Well, because we don't have enough money to do all of this. The deferred maintenance really is a small amount of money that comes from the state based on the age of our buildings and our student population. So, you know, we get about $385,000 a year to use for deferred maintenance. But, you know, as Mark alluded to, for example, if we were going to do a roof, that's $200,000.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, well,
that's
so
not
384 doesn't,
you know? So
doesn't go very far then, does it?
So, you know, and we do, each year we come up with a list of priorities that need to get done, and that list is constantly shuffling because something becomes more important than another.
Again, like our homes.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, there's leaks here or something happens, a parking lot, and all of a sudden we reshuffle, and then something that was a high priority moves down, and then of course that cost goes with it.
Yeah.
And then trying to recoup the monies to make that happen, you know, we just don't have the funds. Okay. So, like a home, you defer, and then you finally get to a point where you say, you know, I think we got to go to the bank and get a loan.
Yeah.
Well, we don't go to the bank, we have to go to the public, but it's the same concept of trying to maintain your home.
Okay. I know in the second part of the program we're going to talk a little bit about, a lot more about what the future holds. And so when you hit that April 30th deadline, now all of a sudden as that task force was meeting, some solutions started to come up. And those are the things we want to talk about. So if you'll indulge, we'll take a break for our Owatonna Today Show supporters, and we will be right back.
Recreational fires are allowed within the Owatonna city limits. They must be contained within a fire pit or a device designed for such use and can be 3 feet in diameter and no more than 3 feet high. They must be 25 feet from a building or combustibles. Only untreated or unpainted woods must be used. Fires must be attended by a person at all times that are capable of extinguishing the fire. This has been a safety tip from the Owatonna Fire Department.
Hello, I'm Glenn Mager.
And I'm Michael Mager with the Brickmager Funeral Home and the Medford Funeral Home. At Brickmager, we are privileged to have served the families of Steele County community for 118 years.
Whether you choose traditional burial or cremation, we promise the tribute your loved one deserves with the peace of mind that you require.
We are proud to be part of the Owatonna Today Show.
Hi, this is Barry Gillespie, president of ERA Gillespie Real Estate, where our pledge is to save you money, save you time, and simplify your life. And we're proud supporters of the Owatonna Today Show.
Hello, I'm David Einhaus with the Owatonna Foundation. Thank you to all of our donors who have helped make Owatonna a better place to live. Will you join us today with a financial gift? Owatonna Foundation is a proud sponsor of the Owatonna Today Show.
Welcome back on this Monday, May 18th. Again, we are talking facilities in our Owatonna School District with Superintendent Pete Grant and School Board Member Mark Sebring. So back to the table we are, and We finished up before our break talking about solutions then coming to the forefront from the task force. Let's take the second segment to talk about those. It's the recommendations going forward. What are we seeing? What is being suggested? What are some things on the table? And where do we go from here?
Well, the task force did come up with some priorities. Safety and security is one of them.
Okay.
All of our buildings are old enough that they were built really pre-Columbine time, and we have to upgrade those to make sure that we can help keep our buildings secure and so forth. Educational adequacy, and that really refers to, utilizing spaces differently.
Okay.
School has changed not only in the last 10 years, but the last 15 to 20, obviously, but the small classrooms in squares and 30 kids in a row and so forth, that just doesn't work anymore. And so we need more flexible space, and that's making it more complicated because we don't have it. In fact, if you go through tours of the building, you'll see kids in the hallways doing lots of learning.
Okay.
And then capacity and enrollment. Obviously, Mark alluded to the fact about the crowdedness at the elementary levels. And we have to figure out how do we make some changes that isn't going to, we can't build at every building. I mean,
Right.
that's just not feasible. So are some things we can do to make that change? And then we already alluded to the deferred maintenance. We're trying to determine, okay, it was about a $72 million cost. What are we really going to be able to manage, and what can we get after? And so those became the priorities. And then from those priorities, the committee really came up with two different options for the board to consider.
Okay.
And I'll let Mark talk about those.
Talk about the two options. All right.
Well, the two options start looking very, very similar. The two options have a path that would include, first, taking care of the overcrowding at the elementary level.
Okay.
That part of it would also have us build out Willow Creek
Okay.
and expand the size of Willow Creek so Willow Creek could become actually another elementary school.
All right.
Sixth grade by itself was a good idea for a while, but from an educational standpoint, we've figured out or have come to understand that moving the sixth graders over to the junior high and creating a real true middle school format would probably make more sense.
Okay.
So in addition to Willow Creek being expanded, the junior high would have an expansion as well.
Is there room for that?
There, on the ground itself, there's plenty of room.
Okay.
So we would end up with all of our elementaries being true elementaries, K-5. The junior high would become a true middle school, 6, 7, 8.
7, 8. Okay.
So those are the educational components of the first pathway. It would also include the safety features that Pete just referenced. There could be some additions to Lincoln and McKinley to expand some space that we would need there.
All right.
And the last part would be the big number for the deferred maintenance.
All right.
If we did something like that, and I'm rounding these numbers off because it seems as though they align themselves just a little bit differently each time we look at it, but it would be somewhere in that 80, maybe even $85 million range.
Okay.
All of that leads us to a fork in the road. And the task force basically said, these are the things you have to take care of right away. But the next part of this is, you've got to figure out what you're going to do with the high school. And
That's been an ongoing question
has
for
been.
about as long as I can remember. But yeah.
the high school, a renovation of the high school has some real advantages, and there are some things about it that just don't quite make as much sense. Building a new high school has its advantages, but there are some things that are difficult with regard to that as well.
Okay.
Maybe Pete should talk about that.
Well, and at one time, and you guys have probably covered this, but at one time Willow Creek was thought to be the expansion for the high school, right? What happened since the time that Willow Creek was built and now?
Well, that's a really good question, Devin. I think the start of Willow Creek became really, really successful for the community. They had a great principal in Elmer, and I think it was all the fifth graders coming to one building, getting to know each other and so forth. It was really, really successful, and I think it was so successful that people overlooked the commitment that was supposed to occur, that there would be a seed site and transition.
Right.
But as we have gone through and looked at the academic side of things, Willow Creek had become an island. There was really a little bit of an ownership problem because the teachers would see kids for 174 days and off they go. And research has shown that another transition between a grade level to a grade level, moving from one building to another, the kids have to get reaccustomed all over again, and it takes time, and it's really very inefficient. So out of this plan, it was decided that we can make efficiencies better, and then we can have a better academic opportunity for kids. So that was how Willow Creek's, the decision was to expand it, as Mark said, to a regular K-5 building, enhance the junior high, because they had been over years trying to decide, are they a junior high, are they a middle school? They did some teaming, and you can't really do it with 2 grades. And looking at how we best utilize the buildings we have, that is what makes the best sense. And expanding Willow Creek will help lower some of the other issues of seat counts in our other buildings, because we'll try to balance them out a little bit better. And you know, Wilson, for example, is over 600 students.
Yeah.
And you couldn't shoehorn another kid into that school. And by expanding Willow Creek, we can have a little bit more room. It helps produce, you know, a wholesome district where you have 4 balanced elementaries and not one that might be like Wilson's 600 and Washington's, you know, about 450 or so, or 500. And the task force recognized that that's the most common sense thing to do. But as Mark alluded to, that leaves the high school as another option. And you know, you mentioned it's been going on and on forever, and in my first 10 years here, it was about the high school. What are we going to do with it? And you know, the board is going to evaluate what is the next thing to decide upon the high school. And as Mark talked about the renovation sounds really easy, but it's on 19 acres, and that's extremely small for a site for a high school. And number 2 is, if we choose to renovate, how long is that going to take?
Yeah.
You know, what kind of interruption will that have to the academic side of things? Will it take 2 years to renovate? Will it take 3 years? And it's really expensive to renovate. If we choose to build a new high school, that's expensive. And then, of course, what do you do with the present high school standing there?
That was going to be my question. If another one gets built, what do you do there?
And I think for the board, you know, and the community will be, we really need to fix K-8 now. And then maybe in a couple of years, we have time to talk about the high school, because it's a very emotional discussion. It has been internally anyway. And the community will have an opportunity to really sit down and say, okay, what is the best thing to do for the high school? And if we build a new high school, can we, you know, reuse parts of it or some of it? And that'll help, I think, solve some of the questions for other buildings we have that maybe we really don't know if they're in well use. We do know this: Washington Elementary will not house elementary students. It's just not conducive for kids learning. It's very small on 3 acres. It's in a terrible location as far as traffic congestion and parking and picking up students and dropping them off. So we have a lot of questions ahead of us, but the time we have other than taking care of Kate, we can sit back and go, okay, let's have our thorough discussion, because the high school in the end is, you know, the big rock in the middle of what can we do, what's the best way to go for it. And the public needs to have a little bit more involvement with that, because as I said, it's been a historic place in town. Yep. It's a beautiful building, but too much of it's run out of its use from my perspective, because it's almost 100 years old. And you know, there's only so many holes in the wall you can patch.
And only so many ways you can try to add space where there, and those of us that have been there for conferences and everything else have seen, you know, wow, okay, this is, it's choppy.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. So
it's a real maze getting through it, and that's not conducive for kids, and but it's a discussion, for parents. But you know, there's a discussion that's going to have to come along, but we really believe addressing K-8 first is an important part.
Okay, and you mentioned one of the very most important things right up front. All-day kindergarten is here, and it's not going to go away.
Right.
And I mean, it's here to stay. So how do we deal with what that has done now with our schools, and not to have temporary classrooms?
Right.
You know, that's probably not the best idea to have, you know, little portable things. And
well, that's why they're called temporary.
Yeah, I know, because they're supposed to be temporary.
They have a tendency to last long.
So what can we expect to see? I know we need to wrap up here, but what is the next step that we as the public are going to be seeing?
The next step is that there will be informational meetings, one in fact tonight, another one in June, that would be open to the public for people to not only hear a good synopsis of what you've heard today, but probably a bit more detail. In addition to that, the board has on its calendar August 1st.
Okay.
We really want to have if there's going to be a bond issue that's going to be presented, we really want to have this decided and put to bed by August 1st.
Okay, that is a healthy, aggressive timeline. But good for you, because you do have to set those things. You have to get
Yes.
them set, and you have to say, we move forward. How do we move forward? We
Right.
need to get it going and not just sit and waffle around. So best of luck to you as you get the information out to community members and allowing us to understand a little bit more today, and our viewers what is going on. Thank you very much, Pete. Thank you, Mark. And
You're welcome.
good luck with everything, and we'll see how everything shakes out
Yeah,
here over
we
the
look
next couple of
forward to
months.
it.
Yes, well, I'm sure we'll have you on again, too. We're going to take this break for our supporters, and we'll be back up to wrap it up for today.
Amy Swain Hearing Centers is a proud sponsor of the Owatonna Today Show. I'm Dr. Amy Swain, and I want everyone to hear better.
Hello, I'm Sean McNulty,
And I'm Deb Gillard with Brookdale Senior Living, Sterling House, and Clarebridge of Owatonna.
and we are a proud sponsor of the Owatonna Today Show.
It's time to wrap up today's program with a few announcements. First of all, Riverbend Nature Center invites seniors to join them for their monthly Owls Lunch and Learn program. That will be this coming Wednesday, May 20th, from noon to 1:45. The guest speaker this month is Scott McInthum from the Minnesota DNR Fish Hatchery in Waterville. The fee for the Owls program is $12 per person or $10 for Riverbend members. Pre-registration is required. It says you needed to do it by Friday. I'm just looking at that note now, but if you'd like more information, I think if you hurried up and got on the phone and asked to see if you could still be a part of that, you may well be able to do that. And again, that's Riverbend Nature Center in Faribault. Another note from them, too, they'll be hosting Bird Fest, a hands-on celebration of the spring return of Minnesota's wild birds. That will be this coming Saturday, May 23rd from 8 to noon. It's a family-friendly event. It's for young and old, fledgling birders and experts and everyone in between. There's a morning of a variety of bird activities. It will be culminating with a keynote presentation on birds of prey by the Raptor Center at 11 o'clock. Several of the Raptor Center's education birds will be present for visitors to see up close and watch in action, and that is always fascinating. Registration for Birdfest is preferred but not required. Riverbend Nature Center's phone number is 332-7151, 332-7151 for either of those events. Steele County Historical Society is welcoming back the Americana Showcase this Friday, May 22nd, 7:30 p.m. in the Wenger Room of the History Center. There are 3 musicians scheduled to perform, and tickets are required, may be purchased either in advance at the History Center or at the door on the evening. Cost is $20 for non-members, $15 for Steele County Historical Society members, and all of those proceeds will benefit the Steele County Historical Society. Smokin' in Steele is coming up, not this weekend, but the following, and a little bit later on in the week, we'll have a program. John Hammer will be joining us to talk about that. Please join us on Wednesday when we've got a lot of things. Well, we got a big school week this week. Teacher of the Year, both candidate interviews and then the Teacher of the Year being interviewed, and that will all be on Wednesday, so please join us then.